The last day of death row. Inmate John Hanson. Why did justice take 26 years? Hello friends, and welcome back to Death Watch Diaries. Tonight, we bring you a story that has lingered for more than 2 decades, a case that left Tulsa, Oklahoma reeling with grief and unanswered questions. On June 12, 2025, John Fitzgerald Hanson is scheduled to face execution after 26 long years on death row. His crime was not just a headline, it was a devastating double tragedy that claimed the lives of 77-year-old Mary Agnes Biss, a beloved grandmother and hospital volunteer, and 44-year-old Gerald Thurman, a husband and father who paid the ultimate price for trying to do the right thing. Their names deserve to be remembered, and tonight we walk together through the events that changed so many lives forever. Stay with us until the very end. And don't forget to subscribe to Death Watch Diaries for more prison documentary stories that honor victims and reveal the final hours on death row. It was August 31st, 1999. Tulsa was alive with the bustle of late summer. People were shopping, running errands, preparing for the long weekend. Among them was 77-year-old Mary Agnes Biss, a retired banker, grandmother, and hospital volunteer who had spent her life giving back to her community. She was the sort of woman who was always smiling, always helping. That day, she parked her car at a local mall. It should have been an ordinary day, but it became the last day of her life. Nearby was 44-year-old Gerald Max Thurman, a businessman making deliveries. He was the type of man who noticed when something didn't look right and who always tried to help. That simple instinct would cost him everything. Because in that same parking lot, 2 men were hunting for opportunity. John Hanson, then 31 years old, and his accomplice Victor Miller had already robbed liquor stores earlier that day. Now, they needed a car. They spotted Mary alone in her vehicle. To them, she was just a target. They forced her into her own car, a terrifying ordeal for a woman who had lived her life with kindness. They drove her away from the city, heading toward an isolated area near Owasso. But fate intervened. Gerald Thurman noticed something off. He saw the men, saw Mary, and knew something was wrong. He even called his nephew to describe what he'd witnessed. That act of courage, trying to be the watchful neighbor, the Good Samaritan, would be the last call Gerald ever made. Victor Miller shot him 4 times, silencing him forever. And then it was Mary's turn. Hanson dragged her from the car. Witness accounts and trial records later revealed that she was shot 4 to 6 times, left face down in the dirt, partially covered with sticks, as though her life could be hidden away. Mary was a grandmother. Gerald was a father and husband. They weren't statistics. They weren't nameless victims. They were people whose families were forever shattered that afternoon. When the news broke, Tulsa was in shock. Strangers brought flowers to St. Francis Hospital, where Mary had volunteered. Businesses closed early so employees could attend Gerald's funeral. This wasn't just another headline. It was a community grieving together. Mary's son later said that her entire life had been about service helping at church, supporting her family, comforting patients at the hospital. Gerald's son, Jake, called his father his hero, a man who always put others first. For them, the tragedy was unbearable, and it never went away. Hanson and Miller were caught within days. The evidence was overwhelming: fingerprints, weapons, eyewitness accounts, and their own words. Both men were sentenced to death. But even before that horrific day, Hanson's life had been marked by crime. His record stretched back to the 1980s, filled with convictions for robbery and assault. He wasn't someone who had simply stumbled into trouble. His path had been consistent, spiraling deeper into violence. At trial, the jury heard it all. They convicted him swiftly, and Hanson was sent to death row. Yet, as with so many capital cases, the story did not end there. For the families of Mary and Gerald, justice was anything but swift. Appeals stretched for years. Hanson's lawyers argued new points again and again, from procedural issues to questions about his mental health. One revelation came during the clemency process. Hanson had been diagnosed with autism. His attorneys claimed this condition had never been presented to the jury and might have affected how he understood his actions or made him more vulnerable to the influence of his co-defendant. Victor Miller. Some experts even suggested that Miller, the older and more dominant of the two, was the one who fired the fatal shots. But those claims came far too late. The courts ruled that the convictions would stand, and Hanson remained on death row. What made the wait even more frustrating for the victims' families was that Hanson wasn't even in Oklahoma for much of his time under sentence of death. At one point, he was transferred to a federal prison in Louisiana. When Oklahoma tried to bring him back to carry out his execution, the federal government refused. For years, he remained out of reach, shielded by bureaucracy. For the families of the victims, the delays were devastating. Gerald's widow held on as long as she could. But when yet another execution date was canceled in 2022, her son said she lost hope. She died just 2 months later. Her family believes she died of heartbreak, the weight of waiting too heavy to carry any longer. Think about it, 26 years. A generation. Children born the year Mary and Gerald were killed are now adults. Some have never even heard their names. For the families, those years weren't just time on a calendar. They were birthdays without parents, holidays without grandparents, milestones that should have been shared but were stolen. It wasn't until 2025, after a change in federal administration, that the United States Attorney General authorized Hanson's transfer back to Oklahoma. With that, the wheels of justice began moving again. The state set June 12, 2025 as the date. After decades of waiting, the moment had finally arrived. News outlets picked the story back up. Commentators debated whether execution after so long still had meaning, and the capital punishment debate returned to the headlines. But for Mary's family and Gerald's children, the politics meant nothing. All they wanted was for the justice promised to them in 9 to finally be carried out. In the weeks leading up to his execution, Hanson's attorneys continued to file appeals, pointing again to his autism diagnosis and arguing that the punishment was disproportionate. But the courts did not change course. The governor's office signaled it would not intervene. Inside his cell, Hanson spent his last days under close watch. According to prison staff, he kept mostly to himself, speaking rarely, his future shrinking down to a date on the calendar. He received a visit from his attorneys, and a chaplain checked in daily. His final meal request was not made public at the time of filming this story. Whether you believe executions deliver justice or simply prolong suffering, what cannot be debated is that Mary and Gerald should still be here. Their names must outlast the man who silenced them. Let us remember them for their light, not the darkness that took them. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to Death Watch Diaries for more prison documentary stories.